you're on the Six Screens Telenetwork, earning the reputation of giving all the right ingredients, uninhibited, in exposing the hard, cold facts about the Watchtower Society.
And now, in Disney.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome in. We have got our program tonight, Watchtower Insider Barbara Anderson Tells All. Wow, I have to tell you, I'm enthused. I was talking with Barbara earlier today, and the subject that she's talking about tonight is really fascinating because I do remember some of what she was saying when I was a young man in the Watchtower. Now, did you ever think about those newspapers? Did you go to some of those big conventions like at Fenway Park, Yankee Stadium, Comiskey Park, or maybe even out there at Qualcomm Stadium? They would actually walk around with newspapers with Watchtower headlines. Oh, the witnesses hit town. They're doing wonderful. Jehovah's Witnesses are great people. It was all propaganda. Barbara's going to tell us all about that. So the history of Watchtower's use of newspapers to deceive. So that's what her program's about tonight. So let's bring Barbara in right now and make sure that we got a good stream going. Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Rick.
So there you are. The subject got a lot of people's attention today. It was well promoted. I never really thought about it, but I do remember. I mean, when you get into it, I'll talk a little bit too. But I want you to get into this story. And lately, I mean, you've really been exposing the beans. You know, when you and I talked today, you know, at one point you were going to write a book, and maybe that book still might come to fruition. But a lot of the information that would be in that book, if it ever does get finished, I know it's difficult, but you wanted to share with us on the Six Screens exclusively. And we appreciate that, Barbara.
Well, I've done all this research over the past 20 years. And of course, before that, at headquarters, I researched for the Proclaimer's book. And I discovered so many things. So it's time to start talking about it.
Excellent. Well, we're really looking forward to it. So I'm here. I'm here. We got some questions that we will bring in when you're ready. But why don't you just give a little overview of what will be on the agenda tonight?
Oh, well, at those big conventions, as you said, there were so many young people, especially young boys, who were selling the Watchtower. They were selling the Watchtower, not the magazine, not the organization. They were selling what the organization said that was printed in newspapers that they were selling around the stadium or the convention center. And that was quite exciting. So I'm going to talk about that and some other points. I'm going to go back to Russell's day and talk about the newspaper work that he was involved with. And you'll see the similarities. Now, that's a good picture. That's great. These photos are out of newspapers. And this particular one is announcing that the witnesses are at this particular place. I cannot read the caption of what paper this is from, but from what I sent you, you have probably hundreds of pictures in a scrapbook that I have. I didn't put it together, but it has probably over 100 pictures in there from newspapers that featured the convention, that the newspaper was being sold at that time outside of the building where the assembly was held. So if you've attended those big assemblies years ago, you probably saw these newspapers. Isn't that interesting? Right. Very exciting. So That one in particular was from the Yankee Stadium and the Polo Grounds. A lot of these are from whoever attended the assembly. Like, oh, that one is very old. Like God Be True is what the girl was holding. And from the 1950 at Yankee Stadium, New Yorkers were being introduced to Jehovah's Witnesses in a way that they had hardly ever seen before that. So that's what we're going to talk about. The newspapers I'm going to talk about were very important in the area. Yankee Stadium was in the Bronx, so you can think about the New York Mirror, the New York Post, New York Times, and some newspapers back then that are no longer in print. So they were being sold, and people, of course, who are attending, at the Yankee Stadium Assembly and the Polo Grounds in 58, you had 250,000 people. So can you imagine how many newspapers were sold? So, okay, Rick, I'd like to go over the introduction if you want to start this out.
All right, you'll hold on 1 second. Let me get back into the well, we got some questions for you, Barbara. We do have some questions for you. So a lot of people have always wondered, I've heard your story, but maybe a lot of people never really heard basically how you became attracted to the witnesses. So the first question I have for you tonight is, what attracted you, Barbara Anderson, to the Jehovah's Witness religion?
Well, many things did, but it really had to do with my personality. As a child, I was attracted to the witnesses because I was very idealistic, and I really wanted to help others. I certainly had no idea what I was getting into when I joined the witnesses. Over the years, I enjoyed the security of the group and had no idea of what I was really sacrificing to be a witness, because I was content to allow them to control the information. Long before I left the group, there were fleeting suspicions of things not right, but I didn't want to disturb the life I had created for myself. It took being in Bethel's writing department to wake me up to the facts. It took years, though, to get out, even though I knew the Watchtower did not hold absolute truths about anything, or in other words, their knowledge of spiritual matters was not absolute. You have another question for me, Rick?
Yes, we do. We do have another question for you, Barb. So the second question would have to do, well, again, with the Watchtower. So the second question would be, how do you feel about PMOs, that is Jehovah's Witnesses, that are physically in and mentally out of the organization? So how do you feel about those PMOs, Barb?
Well, it's a new, kind of a new thing to get in your head, PMO. But we know a lot of people that are physically in and act like witnesses, but they're not really believers. I have a deep fellow feeling for all those who are still involved with Jehovah's Witnesses and would rather not be, but due to certain circumstances, they can't exit. And we all know about those circumstances. We've heard enough about this. Anyway, in time, I have found from experience, all situations have a way of resolving themselves. So I advise folks to be patient, and things will work out and in ways you least expect. So it's important to remain calm about it and not disturbed. And it will work out. I've seen it, and it did in my own case and my husband's.
Well, very good. Very good answer, Barbara. So let's move on here. Now, we know you're not a Jehovah's Witness any longer. That we know. I mean, we've seen you exposing the Watchtower in numerous television programs.
Uh-huh.
So you're not a Jehovah's Witness any longer. So how can Barbara Anderson help those that are still in?
Well, even as a non-witness, I still have an idealistic personality, and I still want to help. So I did do it through offering information about the religion. There's a certain mystique that for years has surrounded witness leaders and the operations of the organization. It was while I was at Bethel that I saw for myself that there was nothing special about the group and that they damaged lives by fostering extreme beliefs and inaccurate information. Years later, when I finally had enough of it all, I left, no matter what the consequences were going to be. I didn't care. I wanted out. My circumstances were such that regaining power over my life that I unknowingly lost in my youth was very important. And I was determined to live a happy and normal life without the control from a small group of misguided men. If I can be of some help in the winter of my life to anyone who in the past was or is presently connected with Jehovah's Witnesses and suffering from that connection, through any knowledge or information that I might possess, I'm happy to share it. I'm not a martyr. I don't live for exposing the Watchtower, but rather a caring person, once an insider, now offering a candid and truthful look at a very non-transparent organization, hoping that what I write about and talk about helps others in their pursuit of freedom.
Well, what I do know, Barb, is when people listen to Barbara Anderson, you're going to get the real news, you're going to get the real facts, you're going to get the real truth. I know you don't embellish, you in no way try to sensationalize, and that's good. And that's why you're a credible person, Barbara. But I'll tell you, you and I talked about this today, and I was mentioning earlier to the folks listening in that I can remember as a young man, my early 20s, actually, I was only 20 years old, and I was a married man at the time with a young little baby. And we traveled from Boston down to Yankee Stadium in 1969 for the Peace on Earth convention. Well, there was 120,000 people there. And I can remember there was newspapers like some of the ones I was showing earlier in your program. And they weren't witness boys, but they were paper boys for, whether it be the New York Post or whatever newspaper, New York Times, whatever newspaper it was at the time, I can't remember. But they would go around the stadium, learn about Jehovah's Witnesses. The Jehovah's Witnesses are filling the city. And they would be yelling statements like that and then have headlines that big, bold print about the witnesses. So, all the witnesses, I bought some. In fact, you buy them for like a souvenir. And so I wish I still had one. I wish I still had. Yeah. But I can remember people were buying them. And how would you not? They're only like at the time, maybe a dime, if even then, maybe a nickel back then. But it was chump change, really, when you think about it. But boy, everybody was buying them. But the Watchtower was raking in, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, many people who are watching or listening this evening, they're really too young to remember some of the huge international conventions that Jehovah's Witnesses held many years ago. But they probably have seen impressive photos like you were showing. And the 1958 convention was very, very meaningful to me. I was engaged to a Bethelite at that time. And I'm still engaged with a Bethelite, but married. But I'm engaged to him because I certainly do have to be around him all the time. And that has been for a very long time. But we've attended these huge conventions together. And it was very exciting in 1958 to be amongst so many people. And Joe was working, he was at Bethel, and he was working the night shift. And so he would leave and get a few hours of sleep he would leave the assembly when it was over, and then show up the next morning, because it wasn't that far. It was in the Bronx, and he was in Brooklyn. So, but it was so exciting. We were married the very following year. But now, the as you said, the newspapers, that was almost annoying. I mean, they would these.
Let me read you some of the headlines here I
Yeah.
see coming across. Let me just I'm really fascinated with this. These headlines coming across on the newspapers. I'm just scrolling down through them, so it might be going a little fast for you guys, but they have these headlines that really. Well, here's a picture right here I'm showing you. There's a bunch of the witnesses, and they formed a human chain. As Judge Rutherford was coming by one of the conventions.
Yeah, that's right. They wanted to make sure he got through. You know, the king has arrived.
Oh, he would be mobbed. And look at this picture right here. That is a trailer setup, a trailer camp. So, you know, the witnesses, that made for good PR. I mean, the witnesses, the witnesses.
1950, they had these trailer parks of witnesses bring their trailer or tent. Joe and his family, his mother and two sisters, that's what they did. They stayed in the trailer park. A lot of them were in New Jersey.
Yeah, look at that picture right there. And when you stop and think about it, that had to be a real hardship. Imagine now those conventions back then were like for a whole week. And I know the one I went to was at 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. And imagine after being so tired, you got little children, and you gotta go. You know, it's probably all mucky, dirty, and smelly, and you gotta go sleep in a tent. But these are the type of photographs they were showing, and you can see. I'll scroll down here, and witnesses meeting reaching its climax. All of these really big headlines: 10,000 cases. In the arena, in other words, 10,000 people, more than it's unbelievable. Some of the stuff I'm reading. Thank you for sending me this, but I'll share it with people. Look at the picture right here. Witnesses from many states. You can see them. Jehovah, what's that say? Jehovah Witnesses from many states. Then we got. I'm going to kind of scroll down here and go slower so you can see it. Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses.
They can.
Jehovah's Witnesses by thousands sleep wherever they can. Well, these are the type of headlines that were in the papers that these guys were selling, and really, of course, building the witness work up. Well, let's scroll down. Jehovah's groups rooms canceled. I don't know what that. Hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, we went out of rooming work before the assembly. Because I lived in New York before the 58 assembly. We'd go out in the rooming work, and people would let us have a room in their apartment. And then back at Bethel, I worked at headquarters, and typing in the room where the rooms were and assigning to people. This is for 58 Yankee Stadium.
Well, here's one here in St. Louis, in the newspaper there, that 30,000, he estimated 30,000 Jehovah's Witnesses already are in St. Louis for the opening of the 5-day convention. So, I mean, they got a lot of press, and of course, a lot of it was their own Jehovah's Witness propaganda to sell more papers. Let me
explain that.
Hold on 1 second. Let me just read some of the headlines, and I want you to come back and explain it. So all states represented. Automobiles bore license plates from virtually every state in the nation. Many Massachusetts cars carried signs stenciled on their side saying, what they say? Many from Massachusetts, signs on their car will offer residents a copy of the book by E.B. Rutherford. All this propaganda, unbelievable, Bob. Go ahead. What would you like to say?
Well, back in those years, when the Watchtower's public relations department oversees, all the big conventions had a department. It started usually a few weeks before the convention started, and they would notify the local. We're talking about the big conventions now. They would notify the local big city newspapers about the up and coming super special witness conventions, such as you're showing. And he knew from experience that the newspapers would treat the witness convention news in a very special, and get this now, money-making way. And you'll hear how that came about. But those who attended these conventions, they didn't know about that special treatment, which I will explain. Yet with the full knowledge that the news coverage was fake. Now, that's the interesting part here. That man who would be the Public Relations Department overseer, he knew that the special treatment, the news, would be fake. Watchtower speakers, they would capitalize on what the newspaper publishers did by pointing to the extraordinary newspaper coverage. You remember that? Your speaker would say, like Noor, he would say, "Oh, isn't it wonderful? The newspaper are covering us. All of New York is going to know we're here. What a witness this is to the area." And telling us this. And so we were so excited. We were thrilled. And to our inexperienced, trusting, and sincere minds, I speak for myself, this information was proof of our distinctiveness and caused us to be so enthusiastic like I am right now. And when he would say those things, we would clap. We were so thrilled. And this was out of bliss because we're being recognized. And that made our religious commitment even more certain. So, as I go on here, now this is going to be like a podcast because I'm going to do a bit of talking here. There's quite a bit of information. And if you can't put up with all me talking, just tune in another day and listen to it because Rick will have it on there. But it is worth hearing this. Okay, now I speak from experience. When my mom and I attended our first Yankee Stadium convention in 1955, we couldn't help but notice all the newspaper vendors on the sidewalks, and they were hawking what was called a special edition. And it was important newspapers. This wasn't just something a paper you never heard of. And he featured front page articles about the convention with accompanying photos. And that's what you just saw. Many articles about the convention event, Jehovah's Witnesses' beliefs, and about those who attended from around the world were so lengthy, they would even continue to the next page. I was delighted. Now listen how this little girl felt. I was 14. In 1955, I was 15. And I was delighted to see the broad coverage of the convention, thinking that maybe our non-witness New York relatives, because at that time, I'd been born outside of New York City in Long Island and raised there. And so I had New York relatives. And I was so thrilled. They would be reading about the work of Jehovah's Witnesses in their daily paper. I hoped it would help them overcome their opposition to our new religion. They were quite irate. They blamed me for splitting up the family, accusing me of influencing my mother to give up Catholicism and embrace a religion that didn't allow members to celebrate the holidays, days that had been very, very important to our family. Of course, my mom bought a copy of each of the many newspapers hawked by newsboys outside the stadium, as did thousands of other people who attended. Few of us realized what a special edition was. The situation was similar during the 1958 international, remember that's an international assembly of Jehovah's Witnesses. Over 35 years later, when I was a staff member of the Watchtower writing department, I learned special edition newspapers were only sold around the convention site. They had a different front and second page than the regularly published New York City daily newspapers. Obviously, The publishing companies made a lot of extra income selling tens of thousands of special editions to Jehovah's Witnesses convention attendees, who were, for the most part, the only people reading about their own convention in such detail. I mean, not only do we attend the convention, we bought the newspapers, and we thought, oh, everybody is getting a witness. So much for thinking that way, that because New Yorkers weren't getting a witness. These newspapers were specially made for convention attenders. So we were reading about our own convention ourselves. Nobody else was reading it. I came across, when I was in the writing department at New York, Bethel, one exceptionally complimentary article from one of those old special edition convention newspapers, which had been stored in a file in the writing department. The quote that I was interested in could have been useful to the compiler of, at that time, a new book, and that was Carl Adams, and it would have been great to incorporate the compliment about the witnesses in that newspaper into one of the chapters of the book he was working on, which came to be named Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, Jehovah's Witnesses, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom. Then I learned from one of the writing staff that the statement probably originated from some copy that the Watchtower Public Relations Department at Bethel provided to newspaper reporters. So you see, it was Bethel, Public Relations Department at Bethel, providing information that went into those newspapers that nobody else was reading it but Jehovah's Witnesses. And in light of the fact that I believed it wasn't ethical to be quoting our own very complimentary statements and attributing it to a worldly newspaper to make a point, I didn't give it to Carl. I was absolutely disgusted. Funny how learning those special edition papers were not bona fide daily newspapers affected me. With such disappointment when I learned the truth of the matter. This might not sound like a big deal, but back in the 50s, the seemingly massive coverage of the witnesses' Yankee Stadium conventions in the newspapers that were part of my young life when I was living in New York was an important psychological shot in the arm for me, and also for my mom. We, as well as thousands of others attending the Watchtower conventions, we weren't very sophisticated people. So the extensive journalistic hype about the Witnesses' Last Day movement definitely and foolishly cemented our conviction that we were onto something really significant because of what a huge witness New Yorkers were being given. In retrospect, I believe that was the idea. The Watchtower organization wanted Jehovah's Witnesses who attended the convention to be convinced that they were part of a great witness that was happening then. Special edition newspapers were taken home by those attending and shared with other Jehovah's Witnesses and non-Jehovah's Witnesses to prove, we used them, to prove we were being recognized as the only ones preaching the good news of the kingdom. And my mom and I, we started to study the Bible with witnesses in 53. So that was shortly before the 55 assembly. And we had never before heard of the Jehovah's Witnesses religion, even though during July of that year of 1953, my husband actually attended that with his family. And when they lived in Dallas, Texas, they came to and stayed in the trailer park. And so that was just 30 miles from our home. And we had local newspapers. We got the same papers that the New Yorker did in New York City if we wanted to buy them, and we did. And how come back in 53, I wondered then when I I wondered when I was studying with the witnesses why I'd never heard of them. There wasn't any reports of such a huge meeting. There were 166,000 people attending the 53 convention, and we never heard of them. I found out later there was a huge amount of newspaper coverage of the 53 convention in New York newspapers, but not in anything that we read, because the event was only discussed in the special edition sold to Jehovah's Witnesses at the convention. It was no accident that the Watchtower used the newspapers for their own ends, and the newspapers used Watchtower for their ends. And that's what you're going to hear. The practice really went back to Pastor Russell, who used the newspapers too, but not in the way the Watchtower has led us to believe. The Watchtower Society has long insinuated that newspapers printed Russell's sermons at no cost to the society for the newspaper space, because the reports about the message of C.T. Russell was so newsworthy. The sermons were carried free of charge, and they were done like editorials. On page 50 in the Watchtower 1959 publication, Jehovah's Witnesses in the Divine Purpose book stated, the newspaper space was given free, and the telegraphic expense to send the sermon to the newspaper was borne by the society. So, by telegraph, they'd send information to the newspaper. And that's why in these newspapers, there would be big reports, not just on what was said, but other things. Like I remember one which had a 2-page article on Covington. Well, how would where'd they get that from? From the Watchtower. So this was an arrangement that was pre-done, and both sides made money from this. Okay, so they claimed, and I was actually quoting the Divine Purpose book, that 1959 is when they came out with it, that the Watchtower didn't spend any money. Newspapers gave the space. It was free. Is that true? So we're going to see more about this. The truth is that the society most often paid for newspaper space or offered a deal, in that even subscriptions, they would offer a deal if the newspaper would advertise the convention, if it would handle Pastor Russell's sermons. And the society even sold subscriptions to these papers from the Watchtower headquarters. I had no problem with this, but I had a problem with Watchtower misleading us. There were even clubbing deals. Now, if I had been a witness in Russell's day and found this out, I would have been concerned. There was clubbing deals. People's Pulpit, it was a paper of the Watchtower. In their volume 1, under an article, Pastor Russell's Sermons Weekly, says this: many of our readers desire Pastor Russell's sermons weekly as delivered. We're pleased to be able to announce that we have secured special clubbing rates with the papers named below. The prices given include 3 papers, and in each instance, People's Pulpit, the Watchtower, and one of the below named papers, which contains weekly Pastor Russell sermons. That would have been a worldly paper. Send all orders to us. Sample copies of any of these papers will be cheerfully sent. Now, in the Watchtower of September of 1909, this is stated. Now, you're going to hear things that, what a contradiction to what they said and even still say about Russell and things he did back then that are going to be quite amazing. I told Rick a little bit about it this afternoon, and he was anxious to hear of how this plays itself out. In this 1909 Watchtower, it says, the friends of the truth, remember, this is Russell's writing. It's not anybody else's. He's writing what I'm going to be reading. The friends of the truth will be glad to know that more than 300 newspapers in the U.S. and Canada are now publishing sermons. We trust they will be encouraged by you all in proportion to their general worthiness. This is like an advertisement.
Bob, this is Rick, hit the 6 screens. I think what's happening is I think you're bumping up against your microphone with maybe the papers you're reading. We're getting some feedback from that, some bumping. So
that must have been my hand. Yeah.
it might have been hitting the microphone. So we're getting a little bit of that. So just be aware of that. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So Russell says, we trust that they will be encouraged by you. So you Bible students, encourage the newspapers to their, by you all in proportion to their general worthiness, and especially because of the sermons, and that the editors will receive frequent compensations and encouragement. The People Pulpit for June contains a list of such of these papers that give us clubbing rates at special price. Give these the preference and send subscriptions to us. Why did they do this? Watchtower made money through this arrangement. Through these sermons, they bragged and bragged about the sermons, but they were making money. But they never said that. And so now what I'm going to tell you are the facts about another operation of the early Watchtower Society that has not been truthfully dealt with. We've talked about the clubbing arrangement. Okay. In the Proclaimer's book on page 58, Carl Adams wrote, how, though, did Russell manage to get a weekly sermon printed even when he was traveling? Each week he telegraphed a sermon about 2 newspaper columns long to a newspaper syndicate. The syndicate in turn retelegraphed it to newspapers in the United States, Canada, and Europe. In the December 15th, 1908 Watchtower is one of the first mentions of enlarging the use of putting Russell's sermons in newspapers. It was titled Evangelizing Through Newspapers. In the January 1st, 09 Watchtower, Russell said, the publication of the sermons in many newspapers has begun. It is largely for this department of the work that arrangements have been made for the transfer of the Watchtower headquarters to Brooklyn, New York. That's not really the full truth of the matter. One of the major reasons, and I'm not going to discuss much of this now, I will in the future, that Russell could no longer live in Pennsylvania. They moved to New York for the shipping facilities, which was excellent. He had a cousin living right on the next block over from where the Watchtower, where I was, where my husband lived at the 124 Columbia Heights building. Russell was very familiar with the area. Why didn't he move sooner? Well, he says it's because of this newspaper arrangement. And so that's why he moved. He didn't move for that reason. It entered in his mind, I know, to talk about for the reasons to move there. That's all over the old magazines. The Brooklyn newspapers had the reasons for Russell moving there. Russell would have been arrested if he had stayed in Pennsylvania because he went through a divorce. And in 1908, this was a number of years after the divorce, he was supposed to pay his wife alimony. He never did. And so as the years went by, he refused. He appealed it many times. Finally, they had it. Remember, this was a trial by jury, this divorce. And so the judge was involved. A judge was involved. And because Russell was breaking the law, if he stayed in Pennsylvania, he would have been arrested. So he didn't even travel back and forth from Brooklyn to Pennsylvania until the amount that was owed after a number of years was paid for. And how do you like that one? When in Pennsylvania papers, they actually stated that Pastor Russell would be arrested if he came back to Pennsylvania. So that is part of the truth. See, but he didn't even tell the truth there. He said that on another occasion that moving to Brooklyn was because of the shipping facilities, so that they could ship out all their literature. And well, that was true, but why didn't he do that before? Anyway, what he mentions though is, and what's important here, was a syndicate. And he talks about the syndicate, and you're going to get tired of hearing it, but I'm going to read it because it's important. And he managed to hire, he talks about this, a syndicate to publicize the sermons that he wrote. This syndicate went to great lengths to portray Russell as one who had an extravagant lifestyle and one who appreciated the finer things in life. And I'm quoting, this lifestyle presented a problem for some of his followers, the Bible students, who he asked them to sacrifice the present good things in life. And they had been accustomed to seeing him live a modest life. Russell assured them that it wasn't his idea, but that he must cooperate with the wishes of the newsmen, the syndicate, who believed he should be represented to the people in somewhat laudatory terms. In the March 15th, 1909 Watchtower, it says, Russell writes this: what the newspaper syndicate now handling Brother Russell's sermons may sometimes say of him in laudatory terms by no means represent Brother Russell's humble estimates of his own talents. Imagine, he wrote that about himself, but he didn't present it like he did. And so he's saying, I am still humble, but the newspapers, if I'm getting them to print the sermons, they want sales. So they presenting me in a very important and I'm very special way. Here's more about that syndicate that Carl Adams had mentioned. How did he get a sermon to a newspaper? And it was that syndicate that Carl mentioned. It was doing the work. So this, from 1909, is in the Watchtower. This is what they wrote about the syndicate. Russell wrote it. In the interest of the work, we have contracted with a newspaper syndicate, all in capital letters, giving it a general control of the sermons to say which newspapers may have them and which may not, and the terms, etc. That's what the newspaper syndicate had to do. It had to present the terms to newspapers. This syndicate, he writes, will handle the sermons for profit, nevertheless at a low price. Be assured that Brother Russell makes no profit by the sale of the gospel. In view of this, we advise that our friends hereafter refrain from any effort to have the sermons published in any newspaper. So don't do it, friends. Don't do it, Bible students. Leave it to us. They contended themselves contended that with the encouragement of the papers which are publishing them has to be done by the syndicate. The addresses of all the papers publishing these sermons will be sent to us. If your subscriptions are sent to us without specifying which paper you desire, we'll see that you get the one published nearest to your home. Anyway, in most cases, we could supply these to you cheaper than you could subscribe for them yourself, because the Watchtower has a clubbing arrangement. He brought back the clubbing arrangement. So they were in a business, and that back at that time, they at one point were not a nonprofit. They had to go to the powers that be to change their standing to a corporate nonprofit. In fact, it was long after the divorce, and Mrs. Russell had turned up to and appeared to a group of men in government to try to keep them, the Russellites, from getting the okay for a nonprofit, because she said they weren't a nonprofit. That's for a future discussion. That is also extremely interesting. So, these newspaper sermons, things weren't really quite like that they were portrayed. Now I'm going to tell you more about this syndicate. It says this is more about the syndicate, and it says in the 1910 Watchtower, I quoted before, from 1909. So it was constantly in the Watchtower. Brother Russell proposes a very hasty European tour. Incidentally, at the instance of the newspaper people connected with the publication of his sermons, he said, in fact, they're making me do it. They want, the newspaper people, they want me to have a European tour. And Russell will extend his journey to Jerusalem and the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Now, you want to hear more about the syndicate? Got plenty. This is 1910 Watchtower. Curiosity as to why Brother Russell takes this trip to Jerusalem is not to be wondered at amongst our readers. He is recognized as being intensely practical and having a reason for every move. His motive in this instance is not curiosity, nor change of scenery, nor health, nor relaxation, for a stenographer accompanies him, so that not an hour may be lost. He goes at the suggestion of the newspaper syndicate. I'm reading this right from the Watchtower, which handles his sermons, and all his expenses are provided for. Keep that in mind. The syndicate feels that the public pulse, and they urge that it is necessary to center the public interest upon the preacher in order to make his sermons more attractive to the publishers and to the reading public. Brother Russell yields to anything which does not bridle his tongue nor compromise the truth. Okay, so he's maybe a little against his will to do all this, but he's going to do it because of what his messages and the readers and the syndicate is. They're making him do it. And from the 1912 Watchtower in January, it states, for the benefit of our readers, we remark that Brother Russell is very anxious to cooperate with the newspaper syndicate, which handles his weekly sermons, while he retains fullest liberty in respect to the subject matter of his discourses. He yields other points considerably to the syndicate's wishes. This will account, now get this one, This will account for his greater care in his clothing, his more frequent use of cabs and parlor cars. Well, there are articles in 1912 about Russell's clothes. No longer was he wearing ordinary street clothes. He had top hat. He had tuxedos. He was living the high life, rented limousines. But the syndicate made him do it, is exactly what he was saying here. And so the Watchtower states, for his greatest care in his clothing, because the syndicate wished this. And the syndicate insists that Brother Russell's personality has much to do in placing his sermons far and near. And Brother Russell is glad to yield to the syndicate's business judgment because he desires that his gospel message shall be heard the world around. Okay, how are the Bible students taking this? Not good. July 15th, 1913, Watchtower. Some Bible students, they were so disappointed in Russell's new look. Sounds almost like one of those things we watch on television now, criticism of some movie actor's new look, right? A good example of their concern for him is a letter that Bible students wrote under luxurious travel and sacrifice and sent to him. This is what that letter from the Bible student said. From one particular individual, but representing others. I want in all humility to ask you, how could we reconcile the description of the luxurious train, the hotel on wheels and its places to lounge, its cars of waiters with example given us by Jesus of Nazareth? It is not, dear brother, a pandering to the worldly spirit? It seems to me that if Jesus had conducted such a tour, he would have chosen a clean immigrant car containing necessities, but not luxuries. How too can we reconcile the fact that when on earth he had no place to lay his head, with the fact that his chief earthly shepherd, whom he has honored as he has you, on account of your faithfulness and humility, should stay at the best hotels instead of with his humble followers? I'm told that the newspaper men arrange these things for you, but you remind us that responsibility rests on each individual. God can take care of his work in the future, as in the past, without depending on newspaper men. But Russell said he has to depend on these men. Okay. Then the editor replied after printing that letter. In effect, he's saying this again. My words. He's in effect saying the newspaper men made me do it. This is what he says. Now, we live 112 years later from when this was put in the paper, in the Watchtower. And so we have tremendous conveniences in our day. Well, he thought he had them too. And he says, but note this. We believe, he said, that the wonderful conveniences of our day are preparations for the millennium, and that the Lord is not displeased with us for using these conveniences in connection with his service. Quite to the contrary. It is rather our thought that God is providing these wonderful conveniences for the very purpose of facilitating the harvest work. As respects hotels, in the present instance, I had no real need for a hotel because I could have stopped quite comfortably on the train. But the newspaper people handling my sermons are interested in making these somewhat of a spectacle, so that they can draw that much more attention to the sermons which they publish. Sounds like worldly syndicates. They have to make money over this, right? Okay, he goes on. The newspaper surely deserves some consideration from me. It's estimated that my sermons weekly through 2,000 papers reach 15 million readers. To accomplish these results by advertising would cost millions of dollars yearly. For the privilege of preaching the glorious gospel of the love of God in Christ, I'm not only willing to please the newspapers by going to good hotels and my long journeys to Panama or around the world, but I'm willing also to endure slanders and misrepresentation of jealous ministers. Oh, our heart goes out to him, doesn't it? We see no wrong in thus allowing the newspaper interest to have a say in respect to our earthly conditions when principle is not compromised. If they demanded that we should violate our conscience in respect to the publishing of the sermons, the case would be different. I say this: what power that newspaper syndicate had over Russell. When I was doing research for Proclaimers, I was surprised to find out that newspaper syndicate was not what I was led to believe. And when I read what Carl wrote in the book, when he talked about this syndicate, I was really annoyed because I found out what the newspaper syndicate was. And you're going to find out too. The question is, who exactly made up the newspaper syndicate? Is this my opinion? No. This was on page 50 of Jehovah's Witnesses in the Divine Purpose. In that history book, it states that the syndicate was really composed of 4 members of the headquarters staff at Bethel. How about that? But they made Russell. He said they made him do all these things that were against his conscience. He presented his argument like they were a worldly firm, that they were hired. The 1984 Watchtower Centennial booklet on page 24 corroborates that the syndicate was made up of brothers. Quotation. But you'd never know that from what I just read. Another thought, most times Watchtower did pay newspapers to print Russell's sermons, but these were disguised as editorials. And so the reader would think they're reading an editorial, and an editorial usually it is free. It's news. So, but they made the Watchtower made Russell's sermons appear to look like an editorial. Why did they do this? To influence people to think that Russell's sermons were especially newsworthy and not to be confused with a paid ad. And they were a paid ad. This is something the Watchtower continues to this day. They're called advertorials. We see them all over the place, especially during the pandemic, put out by the Watchtower. They look like editorials, but they were paid ads. And worldly editorials are free. But you have to identify in the paper an ad. And what the Watchtower's people have been doing over the past few years is they've been planting these articles that looked like an editorial, but they're a paid ad. And for a newspaper not to identify that this is an ad is unethical. I did a study on this, and I had an interesting discussion with a newspaper editor, because he presented a long article on the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it absolutely was all about the wonderful things of Jehovah's Witnesses and what they were doing. It looked just like an editorial. And I confronted him. And he said, "Oh my goodness," he said, "we messed up. We should have had some way to say that this was an advertorial. It was a paid ad. And they've been paying for these ads everywhere, even in Europe. And they don't care about ethics, do they? With a long past of using newspapers for newspaper gospeling. I got that right out of the Watchtower, that's what they were doing. Newspaper gospeling. Okay? Is it any wonder that Watchtower and newspaper publishers made deals that were profitable for both sides? And they were, and you'll hear this. In the December 15, 1914, Watchtower stated, now this is a change. This is something different that's happened. The title of the article was Service in Newspapers. As our readers are aware, Pastor Russell's sermons and weekly Bible studies have for several years been very widely published in secular newspapers. The number publishing is not so large as formerly. Nevertheless, we are probably reaching more people than ever by reason of inserting the sermons in metropolitan newspapers in New York, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, Los Angeles. The difference between the two services is that in the smaller cities, the sermons are published strictly as news. The newspapers paying for the stereotyped plates, 25 cents per column weekly. It is a business with these conducted by a newspaper syndicate that has fallen off considerably. The number now publishing the sermons regularly is about 1,000. So from 2,000, it went down to 1,000. Newspaper space in large cities is counted too valuable generally to justify the publishing of a sermon of 2 or 3 columns weekly. The society has felt, therefore, that this large field of influence, the large witness to the truth possible through the immense circulation of these papers, well justifies the expenditures in this way of some of the money at its disposal. What they were doing here in the Watchtower, they were actually saying, it's cost money. We need contributions if we're going to continue to publish Russell's sermons. Okay. Now, during the 1958 convention, now we're getting up to our day. Immediately when the morning sessions were over, and likewise the evening sessions, we could hear from outside the stadium the noise. It was the newspaper vendors yelling at witnesses as they passed by, usually repeating their newspaper headlines, stating something sensational that was featured at the convention over and over again. Well, where did they get that from? It was all pre-printed because the Watchtower gave them the information. They're the ones that provided the speakers with the talks. Those were manuscript talks written by the Watchtower. So they provided the newspapers that we were paying for that were the term in New York is when newsboy hawks, H-A-W-K, his papers. And as we walked outside the stadium, the newsboys were everywhere trying to sell papers, as well as those who stood in one place next to piles of papers, many still tied with rope. This is my comment. Yet, with the full knowledge that the news coverage was fake, Watchtower speakers capitalized on what the newspaper publishers did by pointing to the extraordinary newspaper coverage, telling us, and they did. We heard this from sitting in our seat. They're talking just about this extraordinary newspaper coverage, telling us what a huge witness it was to the locals. Of course, we were thrilled. But it wasn't true. Consequently, those who attended the convention wanted the special edition newspapers to read. Take back to home congregation to show everyone the tremendous witness given to the city of New York. During assembly intermissions all around the stadium, more people could be seen buying and reading the exciting coverage of the convention in the daily New York papers. Then they were seen reading the special tract that The society gave out freely each day that contained convention news and interviews with prominent witnesses. I know about that because my husband was printing those special tracts at night in the press room, which were distributed during the day. But more people were seen reading the newspapers about their own convention than they were the tracts. There was also another reason the special edition newspapers were so important to the Watchtower Society, as was Russell's sermons in newspapers so important. And this is a quote from a very knowledgeable man. Regarding what he considered were Watchtower's deplorable newspaper practices, one former JW, we called him Woody. And this is what Woody stated. Watchtower placed two conditions to newspapers on use of their articles. The newspaper had to give them a piece of the money pie, and the same paper also had to run local, regional, and national articles on other subjects. Woody deplored this practice. Watchtower made money off the witnesses without them knowing it. And worse, Watchtower used these articles to show how news of the convention trumped was more important than even national news. Because on the cover of all these papers was about Jehovah's Witnesses, not about national news. The second page was all about Jehovah's Witnesses and what they were saying at the convention. Oh, we were thrilled. Oh, we thought everybody was reading that. So the monetary arrangements with newspapers, that really went back to Russell's day, and future Watchtower leaders carried on the business expertise they learned at the foot of the master, Charles Taze Russell. For instance, remember Russell's suggestion in the Watchtower that people who wanted to subscribe to a certain newspaper that carried Russell's sermons and were in the clubbing arrangements subscribed through the society? Okay, now I'm going to give you another point on this. This is the evidence that the society made money on each subscription, as all newspaper agents did. The word agents, they actually in the Watchtower call themselves agents for the newspaper. So they made money on each subscription, just like newspaper agents who sold subscriptions to newspapers in those years. Now, well, I sound like I'm pretty disgusted, but I'm going to add some information. You think about it. In my book, there was, what I mean when I say in my book, not that I've literally put this in the book. I'm not saying that. I'm saying in my book, in my mind, there was really nothing wrong with the society making honest money to run the business. Nonetheless, I take issue with their continual use of half-truths, the lack of transparency and honesty, the distortion of the facts, and at times outright deception when it comes to their organizational practices. That's what I'm disgusted when I first heard about this. Why did they give a whole different picture about this? As with Russell, it wasn't what he did that was corrupt, even though it could be construed as deceitful, but what he said, it distorted the facts. It misled followers. And it seems to me the reason he did what he did back in his day was from the desire to have himself and his organization appear more important than even the world's daily news. To have his sermons, as Rick has it, he has copies of those sermons in newspapers. In the Proclaimer's book, on one page, there's 7 newspapers. And they have Russell's sermons on there. They really look like they were special printed by the newspaper as news. I worked in public relations since 1956 in that department at large South Florida conventions, including during the 1958 Yankee Stadium and Polo Convention. I was a very fast typist, and I was typing news releases. So I was typing about the convention. We were sending those to the newspapers. I was also familiar with the Society's Public Relations Department manual. Despite all of this, I had no idea that the extra editions were fake newspapers meant for convention attendees until I was told about it when I was in Bethel's writing department. A very important man at Bethel, Ulysses Glass, he was the registrar for Gilead. He was the public relations servant at the 1958 Yankee Stadium convention. Now I'm going to add my thoughts on this. In Bethel, the unspoken policy, I know, I lived it, is that the right hand should know what the left hand is doing, because confidentiality is the operational word. So making an educated guess, I'd say that only Ulysses and maybe a Bethel assistant plus Nora Franz and Grant Suda and probably a trusted old timer in the bookkeeping department knew about the profits made from the special edition arrangement with the newspapers. And that's the way it continues to be. Watchtower's convention department secretly receives large sums of money from convention bureaus in large cities, which are used as a draw to attract conventions to an area. Did you know that? I didn't know that until I read about it. Yet during assembly announcements, what do they do? What do they do? Speakers beg the witnesses for money they say is needed to pay for the expensive facilities. And yet they got money. They got it from the convention bureaus to hold their convention there because they wanted 100,000 or more people to spend money at the hotels and at the restaurants. It was good for the area. And, you know, there was another issue that the Watchtower got involved with. That was, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, more. No, I think 20 years ago and more, where they, at the Tacoma Dome in Washington State, there was a big convention. And the Watchtower would charge the witnesses for parking at that convention, even though the contract with the Dome stated that no parking charges were to be made. Of course, the people in the Kingdom Halls were not told that. They were only reminded to be sure to make a contribution at the convention site for parking privileges. And it was a local paper that exposed it because an elder went to the newspaper. And you could even buy at the Kingdom Hall a 3-day pass to park. Well, who got the money? It was sent to the Watchtower, but the witnesses weren't told. And in that paper, in the newspaper, it was called the Tacoma Parking Scandal. Jehovah's Witnesses were ripping Jehovah's Witnesses off through parking fees. With over 10,000 attending, the Watchtower Society collected over $120,000 in donations from parking. This is money that would have gone into the local economy had the parking been handled by the city. And but the Watchtower didn't pay 1 cent even in taxes. The paper said, "When will the governments wise up to them? Greedy is as greedy does. The Watchtower Society is really all about money." I couldn't conclude this in any better way, because that's the truth of the matter. And it is right now, right this very minute, all over the world, the Watchtower is all about money. And we'll probably discuss modern day deviousness, or more modern deviousness about Watchtower trying to get our money. Okay, Rick, what do you say?
Well, it's very fascinating, Barbara. It really, really is. I find it very interesting what you say. I've been thumbing through some of these newspapers, and I really see that. My goodness, they are such filled with propaganda. I've been reading some of the articles, and it's just. Thank you for sending that. I've been showing it to as many people as I possibly can. If anyone would like, can I send that to people if you don't mind?
Yes.
All right. If anyone would like a copy, now you saw some of the newspaper articles. If you would like a copy of 150 newspaper articles plus, Barbara sent them to me, but you write me at jwworldnews@gmail.com. I'll send them to you. What a fascinating read. I could sit here and read those all night. It's just amazing, some of the propaganda. And
Yeah,
boy,
but who was reading them? We were at the assemblies. We knew all
Oh,
that stuff. And that was so amazing. Although it's nice to have the papers and see this back there, but it wasn't a great witness to anybody. It kept us in the organization because we thought it was the greatest witness, and the Watchtower was doing such wonderful things for us, and everybody was learning the truth.
well, what made sense to me, in fact, it got me thinking, Barbara, and I thought the same thing when I was sitting there in Yankee Stadium in 1969. And I'm saying, wow, look at this. The people of New York, they're getting such a good positive attitude to the witnesses. And it's showing all of these people coming from all over the world, really, to come to this international convention. And I'm saying, this is such a great witness. Not so fast. The public wasn't even reading it.
You could go one block away from the assembly and you could buy the real newspaper if you wanted it, and it had nothing in it about Jehovah's Witnesses.
Now, wasn't that something?
I have a little paragraph.
What a con game, Barbara. I'm so glad that you're coming on here as you're moving forward and getting out of the Watchtower. We've been out for many years, but I'm so glad that you're sharing some of this stuff because as long as I've been doing this and on the trail of Jehovah's Witnesses, I never picked up on that. I never did. But just sharing things with us are just unbelievable. And we talked about some things even today that you'll be bringing up on future programs. Boy, you got to stay tuned, Barb. And if anyone misses your programs, they're going to miss a lot of Watchtower history. I'll tell you that.
I have plenty of it, that I filled out my historical information after I left Bethel, because working on the Proclaimer's book, I would be assigned something that I would do deep research into it. In fact, there was one, I was asked to do tracking on Jesus' ministry, and it was a channel to Russell. And I did so much work on that, and I presented all the work, and it wasn't true. And yet everybody in my youth, we all talked about the channel because they mentioned that they were the channel. And when we found out there wasn't any such channel, they had to meet a criterion of meeting, and we're talking about men of old from Jesus' day to who were martyrs for their religion. So they had to meet a certain criterion to fill the bill to be part of that channel. Well, they couldn't. You couldn't find anybody. And I had the best stuff. I had stuff coming in from libraries in Europe where there was a search for primitive Christianity by former Anglican ministers who, dropped away from the Catholic Church, and then they were ministers and they wanted to restore primitive Christianity. So I read, and there wasn't any. And because there was so much proof of this, societies in the Proclaimer's book, they don't really mention much about it, just a little on page 44, but they don't use that. If they would let research be done like this and present it to Jehovah's Witnesses and say, look, you know, we feel God was using us. We were sincere, but this wasn't true. We're sorry that Nora did this. We're sorry that Franz was involved in this. I'm talking about Freddie and also the Secretary Treasurer, that they knew, and the Department of Public, at Bethel, that department that handled this, they knew what they were doing with this fake newspapers, but they were bringing in the money. I didn't figure this up, but if you were paying 25 cents or 50 cents for one of these newspapers and you had 100,000 people buying them, you could see why the newspapers, they were thrilled with this arrangement. I bet you we kept them in the green. You know, a lot of media is folding, but if Watchtower was really helping out, 250,000 at Yankee Stadium, the polling rounds, my goodness. And the newspapers were just everywhere. So, but on the other hand, you wouldn't have that scrapbook if they hadn't put those newspapers out. So you get to read all about the convention that you weren't able to attend. So, anyway.
Well, what got my attention? Well, you talked about the Tacoma Dome scam, and that I do know about. That was something else. We had that on our Six Screens website there for the longest time. But
Yeah.
you know what happened in Tacoma is the Tacoma Dome is run by the city. It's run by the city. It's owned by the city. So the city would rent it out, and that, of course, would come into the coffers of the city's revenue.
Absolutely.
Now, so what they did at the Tacoma Dome is the city would charge the witnesses for parking. They had a parking facility there, a garage, and they would charge the witnesses for parking. So the head people at the Watchtower, they got a hold of Tacoma Dome officials and said, look, we're not going to have our convention there because, you know, our witnesses, they don't make a lot of money. They have a hard time even coming to the convention. So if you could just eliminate the parking fee, then we could encourage, we'll book it with you. We'll book the conventions. So the officials talked about it, and they let the Watchtower be, well, okay, fine. If you have the conventions here, I forget they had like, 3 or 4 of them in a row. They said, so if you have them here, you won't have to pay for parking. So what did the Watchtower do? They now asked the brothers and sisters to buy tickets for parking. So they made the money. I mean,
yeah, you buy it at the Kingdom Hall. Yeah, but you know what they did? They made men stand in the parking lot. And so if you didn't buy a ticket, you in the Kingdom Hall, and you came in the parking lot, there was somebody there who collected the money, and it was a witness collecting the money. Even, I mean, they looked at it from every angle to get the money, and it was clear profit. And then they begged us, and every assembly they beg us, oh, you gotta pay for the facilities, right?
Well, that used to really irritate me. And the brothers would set a table up in the Kingdom Hall. I specifically remember this. I was in Pennsylvania at the time visiting my sister as a witness. She was a witness. And I went to the Kingdom Hall. And the elders, right outside the Kingdom Hall door, as the people were leaving the Kingdom Hall, they had a table set up. And there was 3 elders sitting at the table. And they were selling the parking tickets. And, I got thinking of even the biblical example of Jesus, overturning the tables in the temple. So I'm thinking, maybe they thought it would be easy if they moved the tables outside and didn't do it inside in view of that scripture. So, because they probably thought people might think that, but they were outside on the sidewalk in the front, entranceway to the Kingdom Hall. They weren't inside. They were probably thinking, well, that scripture might not be appropriate here. It's terrible. But these guys they're scam artists. They're con men, Barbara.
That's what they were. And sometimes I wonder if they were really in any way believers that there was even a deity by the name of that they used all the time, Jehovah? Did they even believe that? Because how can you be a believer and read your own literature, which tells you you got to be this and you got to be super clean, right? Super clean and physically, morally. Your cars have to be clean, everything, and they were dirty. They were dirty because they were coming up with ideas to make money so they could keep this organization going. And is that good? What were they offering? What were they offering that to keep it going? But lies. And those who were running it knew it. They knew they like Lloyd Berry. Lloyd Berry knew. He knew the reason for Jairus, why he was relieved of his position at in Australia in the mid-50s. He did. How could he support an organization that kept this man going, that put him in a position to govern your life, Rick, my life, and all the listeners' lives, because that was a service department. They made the rules. They made the rules. And I can't, for the life of me, figure it out.
Well, I'm so glad you're on the attack. You're like a pit bull here tonight. I'm really good to see that, Barbara.
Oh, well, I've always been one. I just haven't expressed
I'm glad to see it, because actually all the time, and look at even your own, look at what you and Joe did for the Watchtower, all the work, the effort, everything you did for them. You had one child. He doesn't even speak with you today. You got a lot of bones to pick with this corrupt organization. Believe me.
Well, I found out the other day, interestingly, somebody wrote me and said they were on the desk at the in Brooklyn Heights. So that would what they mean by the desk is when you walked into the lobby, there's a man sitting at the desk. And this was not that long ago. Let's see, maybe 8-10 years ago. I don't know, something like that. And they had a folder on the desk. And in that folder, Rick, your name was. In that folder, my name was. The folder contained the names of apostates. And the brother that would sit at that desk had that folder. So he could make a judgment call if the apostate was trying to get in. So when I wrote back to the man, I said, "Oh, I'm delighted. I'm so delighted that I made the list." I said, "Now it would even be better if I made top of the list." And he wrote me back and said, "Yeah, you did." And he said, "After your name, it said writing department." And he said, "I couldn't figure out how could a person who would be in the writing department be a top apostate." So,
well,
I got my reward in full.
Well, I was telling my wife, Susan, today, there's always a question on who's the top apostate. Well, I mean,
I've made the announcement.
but I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. I told Susan today. I says, Barbara is the top apostate. No, I did. I said that. I said she is. She has such a following. She has all these people. She's been on numerous television channels. I mean, they all know you, Barbara. So I vote for you as the top apostate. Not that that's going to get you on a subway. It's only a subway won't do much.
that and $2 will get you, or whatever it is, I'll get you on the subway.
Yeah, maybe it would.
There's so few people left that was in the headquarters in the most important areas of this organization. When I first went into writing, I was taken around to meet with different writers and people who support people. And I got to this one, his name was Iannelli, last name, and he was an important writer. He wrote the beginning of the first chapter in the Proclaimer's book. He wrote All Scripture Inspired of God. Anyway, very nice man, though. And what he said to me, he said, you should be very happy that you were chosen to come into writing. And he said, he said, Bethelites would kill to be in your position. And I laughed because I thought he was making a joke. And he said, I'm serious. He said, they didn't come here to clean toilet bowls. He said they came in here because they wanted to be in the writing department, service department, and these departments that made the rules. And he went on. I've never forgotten that. It was really a strange thing, because when I went in, I never dreamed I'd end up in the writing department, and never really cared one way or another. But
hi, Rick. This is Kathy Harrison. Can we fuck in front of Susan again? Muted.
Pay no attention to that, Barbara. Just a drunken Bethelites coming in once again.
Oh, I got to compete with a drunken Bethelite.
Yeah, they try to come in every so often.
If they hear a little bit, that might be okay. But listen, everybody has a responsibility towards themselves, and if they choose to stay in it, that's fine. I don't care. What I care about is the harm. They have no right to interfere with human rights of other people. That is the issue. And as long as I can breathe, I will continue to expose them. Really, what I expose them at isn't.
Rich Borgie, you there?
It's not the end of the world, what I say, but I'll keep saying it. I'll keep exposing. I got plenty of things more to say, and I'll say them until they stop.
We have someone wants to ask you a question. Dick, is that you? Do you want to say hello, Barbara?
Yeah.
I guess not. I thought he was on there, but he's not. So I guess he just was unmuted. I'm sorry, Barbara. Go ahead. Carry on.
Perfectly all right. Like I said, I'll keep doing this until they stop with the.
I don't hear Barbara anymore.
Okay. For some reason, you don't hear us, Apostate Babe?
Is that Linda?
Yeah, that's Linda.
Linda, is that you? Apostate Babe?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, well, maybe
I
we
don't-
can carry. Maybe we can carry.
I don't hear
for a
that.
few minutes.
Hold on one second. You guys hear
I
me?
don't hear either one,
Hold on one
but
second.
evidently the lines are open.
Hold on one
They're
second.
probably trying to
Isn't this?
find out.
Unmuted.
All right. Can you hear me now, Dick and Apostate Babe?
Yep.
All
Yep,
right.
we're good.
All
Yes,
right. I'm
yes.
not sure what happened. Technical snafu. Barbara, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go with Dick. Did you have a question for Barbara, Dick, first? And we'll go to Apostate Babe.
No, I didn't have a question, but I really enjoy your program a lot. It's nice to get the insider information. We used to get a lot of good information from Reese about C.T. Russell and Rutherford. And if anybody picks up a really good book about the Reluctant Apostate, Lloyd Evans' book, that goes into a lot of that good detail too.
It does, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Some of them are not accurate, and I will confront him anytime, because there are many areas that he is not accurate. And I live for accuracy, and I'm not bragging. Why bother unless you have the accuracy? Look, I thought I had the truth when I was a kid. I lived it for 42 years. Truth. I'm not going to do anything different. I will tell the truth, even if it makes me look like an idiot when I make a mistake. That doesn't matter. It's the truth that we all should be. And there are some things in his book. I don't care about his private life. I care nothing about what people do for themselves. They are the responsibility of their lives depends on them. And there are issues that people have with different writers. That's not the thing. The thing is, Watchtower is interfering with human rights of those associated and those who have long been not associated. And they made a remark back in the 50s that they would kill. I have the remark that because they thought they were God's organization, and that it would be okay to kill, but the world does not allow anything like that over religion. But it was, at one time, it was legal that you could kill somebody if you thought that God commanded you to do so, and whatever. So I see here on the comments, there's a mention of Rick and Barb, Carl Olaf Johnson, Bill Setner.
For you, Barbara.
States.
Hi, this is Apostate Linda James. So
Hey,
I
Linda.
remember talking to Randall Waters. Hi, I remember talking to Randall Waters years ago, maybe 25 years ago, and he let me know that the price of printing up a Watchtower or an Awake was a matter of pennies.
Yes.
And that when it got to the Kingdom Hall, then that's where the organization got their profit off of us. So if it took, if it cost 4 cents, I'm just saying if, to make a Watchtower, and then we bought it for 25 cents, then the organization would get the profit. And then we go out door to door and tell them it's just for the cost of printing and delivering. But I found out that we were out telling people a lie when in fact, when it wasn't that way,
Well, there's a lot of money in the religion, and it was all ours, right? Because it was our gas. It was our efforts. We had to buy the stuff. We had to give it. We would give away in terms of our clothes that we had to buy, nice clothes to go out door to door. So we had expenses being witnesses, and it wasn't all theirs. Their expenses were basically for upkeep. 50% of the Bethelites were there to service the other 50%. That's ridiculous, but that's what it was. That was a figure that was given to me when I was at Bethel. And so how could they keep going with that? And they couldn't. And they weren't bringing in enough money as far as the literature was concerned. I know it sounds like they could have been, but the expenses of the presses, the expenses of keeping so many people housed and fed is tremendous. The electrical bill was huge. I dealt with some of these things, so I'm speaking out of knowledge. Now, if they change their way to make more money to keep going, well, that's not unusual. And we were supporting the organization through donations because we wanted them to keep going. It's not unusual. So it's hard to be a critic when you really don't know what it took for them to keep going. Now, I see a maverick person was on this list on the comments of Bill Setner. Well, I knew Bill Setner, so did my husband, knew him long before I did. And yeah, he was a great apostate. But what he went through at the headquarters was terrible. He did not believe, he was I believe he was in service, and he did not go along with the blood deal. And so eventually, he was the first person I ever met at Bethel when I was 15 years old. And he was at the desk in the factory. They demoted him because he was not accepting their way that they handled the blood issue. And so there's other men who had famous names who became apostates because they didn't agree with them, maybe the honesty, the morality, the evidence, the harm. It isn't just money. Like I said about Russell's deal and the Watchtower's stuff, it isn't just the money. It's the deviousness. It's the half-truths. Just tell us we're going to use your money for this or that to keep going. We got to do this. But no, they never tell the truth. And that's where their problem is. And that's why they're in the situation they're in today, because they're I say it again, they're stupid. These men who are running this group are stupid. They don't realize that their neck is in a noose by what they're doing to people. They don't care about people. They only care about themselves and the organization. There's exceptions to the rule. I agree. But you know what? Most of the people that I was dealing with daily in the writing department, they're deceased. They're gone. And that would explain a lot of reasons why there's not much in the way of literature anymore. Because who's going to write it? Who really knows the real ins and outs of the belief system of Jehovah's Witnesses, knows the policies and the practices, and they wrote about this stuff in the literature. The service department people, they're all gone, and there's no way to train people. Those guys were there since the 50s. They learned from those who were there before, and you know, they had a belief system, but there's nobody anymore, and you all know that, because we meet Jehovah's Witnesses that don't know anything. They couldn't explain their beliefs out of a paper sack, can they? So this is part of the problem. They can't find people to do what the others did. Now, I grant you, these were beliefs that the Watchtower put out there, and beliefs are subjective. And in the Watchtower's lingo, they had a certain system of beliefs, and they pushed it out there. They can't get going with the same religion because there's nobody to explain the beliefs anymore, or the policies or practices anymore. Lawyers are valuable. What does a lawyer who is not a witness say about the lawyers there? He said, "I've never met such liars." What a thing to have to deal with. So that basically, in a nutshell, is where I stand on all of this. So much of it was wonderful because there were so many good people that were good through that would have given their life like we would have. And I'm not saying we were good. We weren't perfect. We're just believers.
Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you listening. Who wants to listen to me for 2 hours? My husband wouldn't want to. You know, but the story's not over. I have done so much when I was at headquarters, and you know, you can't have a job working on a history book and not learn about their history, which just set me up to want to learn more. I touch on subjects, I go, "Ooh, is this ever interesting? I got to know more about this." So when I left Bethel, it took me a few years to get in a situation that I could do this. And so I took a part-time job. My husband was still an elder when I did that. And I hired a researcher in Pittsburgh who was not affiliated with the Witnesses in any way, shape, or form. He actually was a lapsed Catholic, but he had the credentials for a professional researcher. So I knew what to ask. Most people don't, because I was in the department working on a history book. It was just a fluke. So I knew, I tell him, I say, "I want to know more on this. See what you can find in Pittsburgh. I want to know more." And he'd write me back and send me stuff. And he would find it in archives, because that's where the birth of this religion was. You know, I could talk about day and night. I could talk about this organization. What about the sheriff's sale? We talk about that in the future. There was a giant sale of the Bible house on the stair steps of the courthouse. You'd be shocked if you knew all the details about that. He got me all the details because they're all there. It was a governmental thing. It was a professional sale, and the papers are there. There are some people who live in Pittsburgh who are doing some of this stuff themselves nowadays, and I really respect them for it. And we can only add to, as we can, to the history of this group, not to just expose them, but everybody deserves to have a history written about them. And I'm going to have a wonderful history written about me by the Watchtower, calling me Apostate.
Well, when I get to hear what you have to say, it's very illuminating. To quote the church from Norway, very illuminating.
It's light. It's new light. You know what? Increased light. You know, that's what Carl Adams used that all the time in the Proclaimers. Increased light. So somebody defined what increased light was. So I wrote it down. It means mindless justification for removing errors. That's what.
Hey, Bob, we've got a few callers here, and then we'll have to wrap it up, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's go to 21. Well, let's go to 602 was first. 602, you're on with us. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Rick. Hey, it's Gilbert. Hey, listen. We all know that nobody, not even the Jehovah's Witnesses, read their magazines because, like Barbara said, like we all know, it's written on kindergarten, first grade level. We know that. However, Rick has talked about artificial intelligence. We all been reading about it, and it looks that Watchtower can actually use artificial intelligence.
They already have.
But the point is this: they could use artificial intelligence to actually write good articles. The problem is what Jared Loesch says, that they're making it up as they go along.
Exactly.
So the problem with the Jehovah's Witness religion is they don't even know what direction they want to go in as far as their theology. But it's interesting the times that we live in, because a lot of corporations and a lot of publishing companies are using artificial intelligence and is coming out with pretty good articles. And people are actually thinking, wow, these articles are written by human beings, but it's not. And how it would work is they would have an artificial intelligence and they would feed it like the Live Forever book, the Truth book. They would feed it like their basic doctrines.
That's right.
And their artificial intelligence would come back with their version, and then they can just edit it. But I think the problem with the Jehovah's Witness, just making it short, is they're rudderless. They're a ship with no captain and no rudder. It's just you don't know where they're going.
No. And these men who are leading it, they weren't exposed to, when they were younger, they became part of this group as being a circuit overseer. So they weren't exposed at headquarters to so much until they were older. So they really don't even know their own history, as far as I'm concerned. But that's neither here nor there. I don't think they really care anyway. So what I care about is for people who leave the organization to be happy and appreciate that they found freedom and go on with their lives. I've met thousands of people. I really have.
We got on the call here, Barbara Quay. We got 213. Come on. Say hello to Barbara. You're on with us.
Hey, Barbara, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Mm-hmm. No, I'm doing well. Thank you.
Barbara, I want to ask you, why do the Jehovah's Witnesses hang on to 607 when scholars say it's 586? I mean, do the governing body know that it's 586 and just deny it? Or what have you heard when you was there?
Well, Ian Nelly would be the one that would have a great answer for that. He knows that they're wrong with 607. And what you'll find is, this is what you look for. Where in the literature does it mention it nowadays. See, what they do is just like on the 6,000 years of the day, the creative day. And what they do is, like in the Insight book, they just don't ever comment about it again. And then if you look for it, here it is supposed to be a Bible dictionary, and you look for it, there's nothing said on it. That's because they no longer espouse that. But they don't want to come out with an article on it and call attention to their past drivel. And that's the only way I can explain it, because they know, because I've talked with them even back years ago on some of these issues. And then one time I asked a question that nobody had an answer, so they sent it off. Okay. I wish I could remember clearly what I asked about the scripture on the who in the resurrection will that woman's husband be? Because I was doing research for on the Proclaimer's book, and as I was reading, I kept coming across an interpretive comment on that scripture. So I would out of curiosity, I would make a copy of it. So I made copies. I had a whole pile of all the different statements of belief about that scripture. And so I handed that to the Awake editor. And I said, which one do we believe in now? Are we going to be like angels in the heaven? And like you contrasted that. If you're married more times than you all die, who's going to be your mate? So he and another guy who had a lot of influence sent it up to the teaching committee, and took 6 months, and they answered it. You know what they said? We're never going to touch that scripture again, and you won't find it. So they just drop something that they, rather than admit. I mean, could you imagine them admitting that we have said our answer to what this scripture means in many different ways in the past? They would have been better off to do that for our sakes, but they don't do it for anything. They just drop the subject. And then and that's the way what's in the Insight book about the creative days. And there's a lot of other things you can go look up in there and see. But that's outdated now, too. But do they put out places that you can do research for, like index? Like they were putting out an index for years, and you could go and look up a topic and then go see what it says in the past. Do they still do that? Do they go back? No, because they discourage anybody from having the old literature. If you have it and then you track it, the belief, and you see all the different ideas and changes, and nobody wants to admit that they were wrong, because God was giving them their messages, so to speak, they believed from God. That's all I can say to you. Go do some tracking. I've been out for years. I know on 607 what I found way back then, but I know nothing how they stand on it now. I don't read those.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. And we want to thank all the callers. Boy, you did a great job tonight. We got a lot of people that came through here tonight. So we're looking forward to more of your commentary coming up in the next weeks and months. You got a lot to say, Barbara. Thank you very much for sharing all of this with us tonight.
You're welcome, and thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Now, say hello to Joe and keep waving that flag of victory. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. There we go. Well, that is Barbara Anderson, and we're so glad to have her on our network. Boy, she has so much to say. Well, don't leave us now. We have got JW World News coming up next. That's the news the Watchtower doesn't want us talking about, but we talk about it every Saturday night and every other Sunday here on the Six Screens Tele Network. So now we're going to go on to JW World News we're going to end this broadcast. So those that are listening in, just stay on this channel and you'll be able to get the news tonight. We have another program coming up after the news with Eric, a former Jehovah's Witness in Tennessee. And he's got a great program, Awakening After the Watchtower. That's coming up somewhere around 9:30, 9:45. So we'll see you next on the news. Thank you.